A knight thunders past, his lance shattering against a shield in a spray of painted wood. Modern festivals love the spectacle, but they only show us a polished replica of the past. What games truly shook the ground at a medieval celebration when no one was watching? This journey uncovers the authentic, dangerous, and utterly surprising games that were the heart of these historic festivals, blending deep historical mystery with hands-on fun. You will gain a complete picture of medieval life, not from dusty books, but through the chaotic, joyous, and brutal games people actually played. We will explore why a simple ring toss was a serious test of skill, and how a village football match could turn into a small-scale war. What one game from the past would you most want to experience for yourself? That spray of painted wood was more than just a show. In the medieval world, a festival was not a simple holiday. It was a vital thread in the very fabric of society. These gatherings, tied to the turning of the year, were where a community remembered it was a community. The games played were not mere entertainment. They were a form of social glue, a public display of vital skills, and a temporary pressure valve in a world of strict, unchanging order. Think of the calendar as a series of anchors. After the long, dark winter, May Day arrived with games of strength and fertility, celebrating the return of life. Midsummer festivals, with their bonfires, often featured tests of agility and daring, leaping through flames or climbing greased poles. When the harvest was finally in, the games became a raucous thanksgiving, a collective sigh of relief before the lean months. At each point, the games served a purpose. They physically brought people together from scattered farms and villages, reinforcing bonds through shared experience and collective memory. In a society built on martial strength, these games were also a public proving ground. The strongest arm, the steadiest hand, the fastest runner, these were not just points of pride. They were indicators of a man's value to his lord and his neighbors. A villager who excelled at wrestling or stone putting was demonstrating the very prowess that might one day defend the village walls. It was a way for common folk to gain respect and status outside the rigid lines of birthright. Most intriguingly, the festival games offered a rare, sanctioned escape. For a few days, the normal rules of feudal hierarchy could soften. A low-born farmer could, through sheer skill in a game, best a knight squire in an archery contest, and be cheered for it. The chaotic, often brutal village football match, with goals miles apart and few rules, allowed a controlled channel for rivalries and frustrations that built up over the year. It was a social safety valve, letting off steam so the structure itself did not burst. The games were fun, yes, but their laughter and competition held the weight of survival, order, and identity. That social pressure valve had its ultimate expression in the grandest spectacle of all, the tournament. While we picture the iconic joust, a clash of two knights in a narrow lane, that was merely the refined finale of a much older, far more chaotic tradition. The original heart of the tournament was the melee. Imagine not a structured duel, but a sprawling mock battle across miles of countryside, with teams of dozens, sometimes hundreds, of armored knights. This was not a game with clear sidelines. A melee was a chaotic, brutal, and politically charged rehearsal for war. The objective was simple in theory: capture your opponent and ransom his horse and armor. In practice, it was a frenzied free-for-all. Rules were minimal, often just the chivalric codes against attacking an unarmed man, or targeting the vulnerable points of a horse. Knights fought with blunted swords and lances, but these were still heavy pieces of steel, swung with immense force. The ground was the arena, with forests, streams, and villages incorporated into the battlefield. Knights would form loose alliances, set ambushes, and chase fleeing opponents for the thrill of the capture. The danger was immense and very real. Historical records are filled with accounts of the cost. At a tournament in Neuss in 1241, over 60 knights were reported killed. Chroniclers frequently note deaths from broken necks, crushed skulls, or internal injuries from a fall in full plate armor. One account describes a knight who survived a battle in the Holy Lands, only to be fatally wounded in a friendly melee back in Europe. This was not staged entertainment. It was a violent, high-stakes proving ground where reputation, fortune, and life itself were on the line every time the charge was sounded. Yet even within that sanctioned chaos, a more refined and symbolic form of combat began to emerge. The joust, that iconic image of two knights charging one another, slowly evolved from the melee's brutal free-for-all into a duel with its own strict rules and purpose. Crucially, there were two distinct forms. The joust of peace, or jout, plaisance, was the version designed for spectacle and skill. Knights used lances tipped with a three-proned head called a coronal, designed to shatter on impact rather than pierce. The goal was to score points by striking your opponent's shield or helm with tremendous force, unseating him if possible, all while minimizing lethal risk. This was the crowd pleaser, the dramatic clash that decided champions in front of the nobility. In stark contrast stood the joust of war, or jout, outrance. Here, knights used sharp, war-ready lances. The objective was not points, but to incapacitate or kill your opponent, continuing the fight on foot with real weapons if necessary. This was far less common, a deadly grudge match, or a test of ultimate martial purity, and it served as a brutal reminder of the tournament's origins, as a substitute for battlefield slaughter. For training in both forms, knights and their squires relied on an ingenious, and often humbling, device called the quintain. This was not a stationary target. Imagine a post with a rotating crossbar. On one end hung a shield, and on the other, a heavy sandbag or a lump of wood. A charging rider had to strike the shield squarely with his lance. A poor strike, however, would spin the entire apparatus, and the sandbag would swing around to strike the knight in the back as he rode past. It was a brilliant trainer for accuracy, speed, and balance, punishing sloppiness with a literal thump from behind. But the most theatrical event of all was the pass d'armes, or passage of arms. This was chivalry as high theatre. A knight or a small group would take an oath to defend a symbolic location, like a bridge, a gate, or even a specially constructed pavilion in a field, against all challengers for a set period. He would announce his theme, often tied to a romantic ideal or a lady's honor. Challengers would arrive, and each combat, whether on horseback or foot, would be a ritualized performance of courtesy and violence. The defender might offer gifts or refreshments to his opponents before they fought. The entire event was a living storybook, a physical poem about honor, designed to display the knight's martial skill, his wealth in providing the spectacle, and his adherence to the elaborate code of chivalry. It was less a sport and more a sacred play where the stakes were reputation itself. But the pageantry of knights was a world apart from the raw, earthbound contests of the common folk. While lords jousted in their lists, ordinary people had their own version of combat, played out in the muddy streets and open fields between villages. This was the realm of folk football, a game so chaotic it makes any modern sport look like a quiet board game. There were no standard teams, no set number of players, and often, no clearly defined pitch. The entire space between two landmarks, like the church doors of rival parishes or the mills of neighboring towns, became the field. The objective was simple: Get a leather ball, sometimes an inflated pig's bladder, to your opponent's goal, which could be a creek, a specific tree, or a marker miles away. The rules, if they existed at all, were brutally simple. No murder and sometimes no weapons. Beyond that, almost anything went. Kicking, punching, tackling, and mass scrums were the standard play. Villages would turn out en masse, with hundreds of men, women, and sometimes even children joining the fray. Shop windows were shuttered, and the game would surge through streets, across streams, and over farmland, leaving a trail of minor injuries and pure, unadulterated chaos in its wake. It was less a sport and more a ritualized, annual brawl. Alongside this organized mayhem, more structured tests of strength and skill took place at local fairs. Cudgeling or single-stick fighting was a popular contest. Two men, each holding a stout wooden staff, would face off, often with a small wicker shield on their free arm. The goal was to strike your opponent on the head hard enough to draw blood, with the first to show a clear trickle declared the winner. It was a brutal, direct test of courage and hand-to-hand combat skill. These violent pastimes served a dual, practical purpose. In an era without a standing army, every able-bodied man was part of the local militia, expected to defend his home. The stamina and aggression of the mob football match, and the precise, painful lessons of the cudgel fight, were informal but effective training for that reality. They kept men fit, accustomed to rough contact, and mentally prepared for conflict. Just as importantly, they provided a sanctioned outlet for simmering tensions. The fierce rivalry between two villages over grazing rights or water access could be channeled into the annual football match. Winning meant bragging rights for a full year, a way to settle scores without resorting to actual warfare. It was a pressure valve, allowing communities to vent their competitive spirit in a way that, while often bloody, ultimately reinforced local identity and solidarity. The festival grounds became a theater where everyday struggles were acted out through sport, where the common man could be a hero, if only for a day. The raw power of the village brawler was matched by the quiet, immense strength of the farmer. While the mob football match tested chaotic endurance, the festival's rustic arena showcased pure, isolated power in contests, pulled straight from the landscape of daily labor. The stone put, a direct ancestor of the modern shot put, was a universal favorite. Competitors would heave a smooth, heavy river stone, often weighing as much as a small child, for distance. There was no standardized weight or technique, just a man, a stone, and the collective judgment of the crowd measuring his throw against the marks of legends past. Log tossing operated on the same brutal principle. A freshly cut tree trunk, its bark still rough, became the ultimate test of raw, explosive strength. The goal was not just to lift it, but to propel it end over end through the air, a display of power that had direct application to clearing land or building a homestead. Wrestling, however, was the king of these rustic games, and its style was a map of local identity. In the English counties, Cornish and Cumberland wrestling emphasized upright grappling and holds above the waist, a contest of leverage and balance. Across the water in Iceland, the ancient sport of glima focused on tripping and off-balancing an opponent with fluid, sweeping motions, a game of finesse as much as force. In villages everywhere, informal bouts in the sawdust or grass were tests of male pride, where a clever hip throw could topple a larger, stronger man and rewrite the local hierarchy in an instant. Perhaps the most poetic of these contests was the sheaf toss. This game was not born on a playing field, but in the harvest. Using a 2- or 3-pronged pitchfork, competitors would attempt to hurl a tightly bound bundle of straw, weighing around 20 pounds, over a horizontal bar set high above their heads. It was a direct translation of farm work, loading a wagon or stacking a rick, into a sport. Each successful heave required perfect timing, a smooth transfer of power from legs to arms, and an intimate understanding of the tool in one's hands. The bar would be raised until only one man, the champion of the harvest, remained. Winning such an event was more than a moment of glory. It conferred a tangible, respected form of local fame. The champion's name would be remembered and recounted at future festivals. His victory proved his value to the community, not as a soldier, but as a provider, a man whose physical prowess directly translated to the capacity to work, build, and sustain. The prizes reflected this practical honor. A victor might be awarded a coveted tool, a belt of fine leather, or most prestigiously, a live ram. This was not just meat for a feast. It was capital on the hoof, a breeding animal that could improve the entire village's flock. In this way, the festival games closed a vital circle, transforming the strength used in daily survival into public celebration, and rewarding that celebration with goods that ensured future survival. The champion did not just win a game, he won a piece of his community's future. Strength alone, however, could not win every contest. While the champion of the sheaf toss earned his ram through raw power, another man could claim equal glory with nothing but a steady hand, a keen eye, and a piece of wood strung with hemp. Archery was the quintessential medieval skill, a deadly serious art of survival that blossomed into one of the most revered festival games. For the English in particular, the longbow was not a hobby, it was a national weapon. The stunning victories at battles like Crécy and Agincourt were won by the disciplined volleys of common yeomen archers, men who had trained since boyhood. To ensure this vital skill never faded, English law actually mandated practice. Every village was required to maintain archery butts, earthen mounds or turf targets, and every able-bodied man was to spend his Sunday afternoons shooting. What began as a legal duty, however, naturally evolved into spirited competition. The festival became the perfect stage to showcase this essential craft, transforming grim military repetition into a thrilling public spectacle. The contests themselves were designed to test the full range of a bowman's skill under realistic conditions. One popular form was clout shooting. Here, the target was not a colored bullseye at close range, but a simple flag or cloth marker placed flat on the ground at an astonishing distance, often well over 200 yards. Archers would launch their arrows high into a towering arc, watching them vanish into the sky before plunging down toward the mark. Scoring was determined by how close an arrow landed to the flag, requiring not just accuracy, but a masterful judgment of wind, trajectory, and power. An even more dynamic game was shooting at roving marks. In this contest, archers would move together across the countryside, taking turns shooting at a sequence of varied targets. One mark might be a patch of bare earth on a hillside, the next a tree stump, and another a willow wand stuck in the ground. It was a simulation of hunting or skirmishing, demanding constant adaptation, different ranges, and unpredictable angles. The champion was the archer who needed the fewest shots to hit all the marks, proving consistent excellence across an ever-changing landscape. Victory in these contests carried immense prestige. The winner was not just a good shot, he was a pillar of the community's defense, a man whose skill directly contributed to the safety of all. His prize was often a silver arrow, a costly and beautiful object far beyond the means of a common yeoman. But more valuable than the silver was the status it conferred. For that day, the champion archer stood as a peer to the armored knights, his skill with the longbow respected as the equal of their skill with the lance. The festival in this way performed a subtle alchemy. It took a skill born of necessity and fear, the muscle memory of war, and through the crucible of competition, reforged it into a source of communal pride, personal honor, and pure, exhilarating sport. The twang of the bowstring and the distant thud of an arrow finding its mark were sounds that connected the peaceful green of the festival field directly to the fate of nations. The twang of the bowstring spoke of distance and war, but not every game required such fierce focus or brutal strength. Alongside the tests of raw power, the medieval festival offered a world of quiet precision and cunning wit, a celebration of dexterity and strategy that anyone could enjoy. One of the most popular was the game of quoits. This was not the modern horseshoe toss, but something more elegant. Players would take heavy iron rings, often worn smooth from countless hands, and aim to land them over a metal pin or hob set in the ground a good distance away. The clank of a ringer was a sound of perfect geometry, a satisfying reward for judging weight and arc with a gentle underhand flick. It was a game of pubs and village greens, where skill, not strength, decided the winner, and a well-thrown ring could silence a braggart. Then there was skittles, the thunderous ancestor of modern bowling. In a simple alley of packed earth, players would roll a wooden ball or a rounded disc of cheese, aiming to knock down 9 wooden pins set in a square formation. The crash of tumbling pins was a festival soundtrack, a game of simple physics where a slight spin on the ball could mean the difference between victory and defeat. For something truly portable, people played knucklebones. This ancient game used the small ankle bones of sheep or goats, polished smooth from play, tossed and caught on the back of the hand like jacks, or used as a primitive form of dice. These little bones were a pocket-sized pastime, a game of chance and quick reflexes that could be played on any flat stone or tavern table. But when the physical games were done, the mind's arena opened. Board games provided a different kind of battle, one of pure strategy played in the firelight of a tavern or on a blanket in the festival field. Nine Men's Morris was a universal favorite. Its board, often just lines scratched into a stone or carved into a wooden table, was a grid of intersecting lines. Each player had 9 pieces or men, and the goal was to form lines of 3, called mills, which allowed you to remove your opponent's pieces. It was a subtle, deeply strategic game of placement and blockade, a silent war of attrition that required foresight several moves ahead. A more narrative-driven game was fox and geese. This asymmetric contest pitted one fox, a single piece, against a flock of 17 geese. The fox could jump over and capture the geese, while the geese tried to hem the fox in and trap it so it could no longer move. It was a perfect allegory played out on a cross-shaped board, a hunt frozen into a puzzle where the underdog fox could outwit the many, or the patient geese could overwhelm the cunning predator. These were not children's amusements, but serious exercises in tactical thinking enjoyed by adults. They reveal a medieval mind that delighted in pattern, prediction, and mental combat. In the smoky warmth of a tavern, over a board scratched into an oak table, a farmer could outmaneuver a merchant, and a squire could learn a lesson in strategy from a grizzled veteran, all without raising a sword or breaking a sweat. The festival was a complete portrait of medieval life, celebrating not just the strength of the arm and the steadiness of the eye, but also the sharp, quiet power of a well-planned move. Yet for all the games we can reconstruct, history holds a few tantalizing secrets just out of reach. Scattered through medieval poetry and the records of lavish courts, there are whispers of a contest so shrouded in allegory that its true form has vanished. Scholars call it the game of the rose, or the jeu de la rose. In romantic verses, it appears as a centerpiece of festivities, a delicate yet charged activity where a rose, the ultimate symbol of courtly love, was somehow the prize, the tool, and the entire point of play. The rules, however, are a beautiful blank. Was it a board game where pieces moved toward a floral center? A metaphor for the lover's difficult journey? Could it have been a physical challenge, like a graceful ring toss where the target was a suspended rose, demanding a suitor's steady hand? Or was it something more performative, a ritual where participants drew lots or answered questions of love and fortune, with each step determining who would be crowned with the rose, and thus honored as the paragon of devotion for the evening? The mystery is its own lesson. It reminds us that the heart of a medieval festival was not always in the thunder of the melee or the strain of the stone put. Sometimes it resided in a silent, elegant puzzle of emotion and chance, a game where the only score kept was in glances and sighs. That lost rose tells us that for every test of strength recorded in the chronicles, there might have been a dozen delicate, intimate contests of wit and heart that faded with the last petal, leaving only a fragrant question in the historical record. The rose's delicate symbolism stands in stark contrast to another form of festival entertainment, one that reveals a much darker facet of the medieval world. Beyond the tests of human skill lay animal sports, brutal spectacles where suffering was the point. The most common were bear baiting and bull baiting. In a purpose-built pit or a roped-off area on the festival grounds, a single bear or bull would be tethered to a post. Then packs of dogs, large, muscular mastiffs bred for courage and jaw strength, would be set upon it. The crowd would roar as the tethered animal, lashing out in pain and fury, would swipe dogs into the air or gore them with its horns. The sport lay in watching the dog's tenacity and the desperate, powerful defense of the baited creature. Bets were placed on how many dogs would be killed, or if a particularly famous dog would finally succeed in seizing the bull by the nose and holding on, a move thought to subdue it. Equally widespread was cockfighting. Two specially bred roosters, often fitted with sharp metal spurs on their legs, were placed in a ring to fight to the death. This was not a pastime confined to the lower classes. It was a universal obsession, enjoyed by peasants, merchants, and nobles alike, with vast sums of money wagered on the outcome. The birds represented a twisted mirror of human combat, their ferocity bred and honed for a few minutes of bloody spectacle. To understand their prevalence, we must see them through a medieval lens. Animals were not regarded with modern sentimentality. They were resources, tools, and symbols. A bull represented raw, untamed strength, a bear wild nature itself, a rooster pugnacious pride. Watching dogs subdue a bull was a symbolic enactment of human dominion over the chaotic natural world. The violence was also seen as a way to tenderize the meat of the baited animal, a grimly practical belief that added a thin veneer of utility to the cruelty. These events were not hidden away. The baiting pit was a standard feature of many festival grounds, as common as the archery butts or the wrestling ring. The excitement they generated was visceral and communal, a shared experience that, for us today, is profoundly uncomfortable. It forces us to confront a fundamental truth about these historic celebrations. The medieval festival was a complete portrait of its society, showcasing not just the noble ideals of chivalry and the hearty competition of the common folk, but also a raw, accepted appetite for violence that extended beyond the human sphere. The same crowd that cheered the champion archer for his graceful skill would, hours later, pack the pits to witness a very different kind of contest, where survival was not a metaphor, but a desperate, bloody reality. Even the blood-stained earth of the baiting pit could be transformed into a stage for something more theatrical and strange. In the sun-drenched regions of southern France and northern Italy, the tournament took a spectacular, and very wet, detour from the land. Here, the joust did not happen on a dusty list. but on the shimmering surface of a river or canal. This was water jousting, a regional spectacle that turned a town's main waterway into a festive, aquatic arena. The setup was a masterpiece of simple engineering and bold spectacle. Two long, narrow boats, powered by teams of rowers, would charge directly toward each other from opposite ends of the course. At the front of each vessel, a wooden platform extended over the water, and upon it stood the jouster, clad in white, the traditional color for this sport. He held a long lance and a small, rectangular shield. His stance was a study in precarious balance, bracing against the motion of the boat and the impending collision. The goal was pure and direct, to use the lance to strike your opponent with enough force to send him tumbling off his platform and into the drink, while somehow keeping your own footing on the rocking deck. The skills required were utterly unique. A land jouster had to manage a charging horse, a heavy lance, and his own balance in the saddle. A water jouster had to master all that, but replace the predictable rhythm of a gallop with the unpredictable pitch and roll of a boat driven by human oarsmen. It was a contest of core strength, lightning reflexes, and perfect timing. The moment of impact was not just between two lances, but between two moving platforms on an unstable surface. A champion needed to absorb the shock of the hit, use the boat's motion to his advantage, and remain as immovable as a statue while everything around him was in fluid motion. The event was a civic celebration. The riverbanks would be packed with cheering townspeople, the water dotted with smaller craft, filled with spectators. The air filled with the shouts of the rowers, the crack of lances, and the enormous splash of a defeated jouster hitting the water, followed by the crowd's roar of approval or laughter. Winning brought immense local prestige, his name celebrated in songs and toasts in the taverns that lined the quay. Water jousting revealed the incredible adaptability of these medieval games. Where a community had a river, they created a river tournament. Where they had a field, they created a melee. The festival spirit was a shape-shifter, molding itself to the local landscape and turning any available space, even the flowing water at the heart of a town, into a theater for courage, skill, and communal joy. The splash of a water jouster was often followed by a different kind of rhythm entirely, one that pulled everyone from spectator to participant. To truly understand the medieval festival, we must expand our idea of a game beyond contests, with clear winners and losers. The most universal game of all required no lance, no bow, and no special strength, just a willingness to join the circle. Music and dance were not mere background entertainment. They were participatory play in its purest form, a communal game with steps as its rules and joy as its only prize. The most common form was the circle dance, or carol. This was not the Christmas song we know today, but a lively chain of people, often holding hands, moving in a circle to a repeating tune. The music was provided by portable, raucous instruments, perfect for a field or a village square. The sharp cry of reed pipes, the driving heartbeat of a tabor drum, and the continuous, droning melody of the hurdy-gurdy, a crank-operated string instrument that sounded like a rustic bagpipe. The steps were simple enough for anyone to follow, a basic pattern of steps and hops, but within that simplicity lay a deeper social function. The circle was a perfect metaphor for the community itself, unbroken and inclusive, where every link was necessary. To join the dance was to affirm your place in that social chain. On festivals like May Day, this play took on a potent, symbolic charge. The dances performed around the freshly erected maypole were not random. They were intricate, patterned games with a clear objective. As ribbons attached to the top of the pole were woven and unwoven by the dancers moving in opposite directions, they created a beautiful braided sheath around the phallic symbol of fertility. The success of the pattern depended entirely on every dancer remembering their steps and moving in harmony with the music and each other. A misstep could tangle the ribbons and ruin the collective creation. Here, dance was a cooperative game where the entire village was on the same team, and the prize was the beautifully decorated pole that would stand as a testament to their unity. Beyond the symbolism, these dances were central to the most delicate game of all, courtship. In the close press of a circle dance, or the paired movements of a more intricate form, the normal strictures of daily life softened. A young man could offer his hand to a young woman in public. They could exchange smiles and conversation in time with the music. Their movements a socially approved form of flirtation. The dance floor became a sanctioned space for evaluation and attraction. A game of glances and gestures played out to a shared soundtrack. The line between playful recreation and vital social custom blurred completely. To dance well was to demonstrate grace and vitality. To be chosen as a partner was a mark of interest. And to master the complex steps was to show you belonged. In this way, the most ephemeral of games, leaving no champion and awarding no ram or silver arrow, might have been the most important one of all, quietly weaving the future fabric of the community itself with every turn and step. The same music that guided the dancers' feet also set the rhythm for the smallest participants in the festival. While knights jousted and men wrestled, the world of medieval children was one of simpler, quieter games, their laughter a constant counterpoint to the adult contests. Their toys were not bought from a market, but made from whatever the world offered. A father might carve a wooden top, its sides grooved to hum when spun with a whip of twine. A bent stick became a guide for rolling a barrel hoop in a race of wobbling balance. A ball, perhaps a scrap of leather stuffed with rags, or a simple inflated pig's bladder, was a treasure that could inspire a dozen different games. These were not mere distractions. They were the first tools for learning the physical world, teaching hand-eye coordination, balance, and the basic physics of motion through pure, unstructured play. Their games, too, were echoes of the adult world, stripped of danger but full of the same social lessons. The game known as Blind Man's Buff, where a blindfolded child tries to catch their laughing, dodging friends, is depicted in medieval manuscripts. It was a lesson in spatial awareness, trust, and the thrill of vulnerability within a safe circle. Tag, in all its endless variations, was a universal training in speed, agility, and the quick judgment of pursuit and escape. Hide and seek, played among festival carts and behind tents, taught stealth, patience, and an intimate knowledge of one's environment. These were the foundational drills for a life that might later require tracking game, avoiding danger, or navigating the crowded, unpredictable streets of a town. What is truly remarkable is not that medieval children played, but how perfectly their play mirrored the structure of their future. Their games were a microcosm of adult society. The rules, often passed down orally from older children, taught fairness and consequence. The teams they formed practiced the alliances they would need in village life. Even the rough and tumble of their play built the physical resilience expected of a medieval laborer or soldier. Most poignantly, these games have survived, not in museums, but in our own backyards and schoolyards. The names may have changed slightly, and the materials are now plastic instead of wood and leather, but the essential spirit of Blind Man's Buff, Tag, and Hide and Seek has traveled across 600 years virtually intact. In those timeless shouts and runs, we hear the most direct, unbroken echo of the medieval past. A chain of play connecting a child on a muddy festival green to a child on a modern playground, both learning the same fundamental lessons about their world and each other through the simple, universal language of a game. That timeless echo of children's play was a world apart from the hushed, Intense circles of men gathered in the shadow of a festival tent. No medieval celebration was truly complete without the sharp rattle of dice and the low murmur of wagers, a universal pull toward chance that threaded through every level of society. Gambling was the festival's shadow economy, a thrilling and dangerous game running parallel to all the official contests. The most common tool was a pair of dice, and the king of dice games was called hazard. It was deceptively simple. A player, the caster, would throw 2 dice to establish a main point, a number between 5 and 9. They then kept throwing, trying to hit that same number again before rolling a 2 or a 3. The rules had many variations, but the core was a rapid cycle of fortune, with money or goods changing hands on every toss. Hazard was wildly popular in taverns and on the edges of tournament fields, its addictive rhythm captivating knights, merchants and peasants alike. Its very popularity made it a target. Moralists and town authorities repeatedly issued ordinances against it, not because they opposed fun, but because these games so often led to public disorder, violent quarrels over debts, and men losing the very wages their families needed to survive. The laws, however, were nearly impossible to enforce, a testament to the game's powerful, enduring appeal. Beyond the dice, gambling infused the official games themselves. It was not a separate activity, but the natural companion to any contest of skill or chance. Spectators would place wagers on the outcome of a horse race, the next pass in a water joust, or which archer would hit the clout. They bet on cockfights and bear baitings with fierce intensity, the fate of coins tied to the life or death of an animal. Even a simple wrestling match between 2 villagers would have a ring of onlookers with small stakes on the line. This informal betting was the grease of the festival economy, a way for even those not competing to have a personal stake in the action, to feel the rush of risk and reward. Keeping track of these countless debts required a clever, tangible system, the tally stick. This was a simple piece of wood, often hazel, about the length of a hand. When a debt was incurred, from a lost wager or a purchased ale, the notched stick became the living record. The tally keeper would make a series of cuts across the stick, the size and depth of the cut representing the amount owed. The stick was then split lengthwise down the middle, creating 2 matching halves. The creditor kept one half, called the foil, and the debtor kept the other, the stock. When the debt was settled, the 2 pieces were matched back together, proving the transaction was complete. These little sticks were everywhere, from the pockets of peasants to the coffers of kings, a physical blockchain of medieval obligation. But this world of chance created profound social tension. A knight could lose his horse and armor in a reckless night of hazard, a catastrophic blow to his status and livelihood. A farmer could gamble away his harvest earnings, dooming his family to a hungry winter. The church railed against gambling as a sin, a diversion from pious thought and honest work. Town councils feared the brawls and thefts that so often followed in its wake. Yet the festival, that temporary space of inverted rules, offered a sanctioned window for this risky behavior. For a few days, the normal prohibitions softened under the banner of celebration. The thrill of the dice, the shared suspense of a wager, was a powerful social glue, creating instant, intense bonds between strangers united by luck. It laid bare a fundamental human truth the medieval world understood well. That fate was the ultimate game, and every person, from lord to laborer, was already a player, rolling the dice of life with every season. The festival simply gave that cosmic game a smaller, more immediate stage, where for a moment you could feel the weight of destiny in the palm of your hand. But the dice held more than just coins or pride. They often decided who would pay for the next round of ale, the lifeblood of the festival itself, For every test of martial skill or rustic strength, there existed a parallel contest of pure consumption, where victory was measured not in distance thrown, but in volume consumed. The medieval festival was a feast for the senses, and the games naturally extended to the table, turning food and drink into arenas for hilarious, grueling competition. Pie-eating contests were a staple, especially at harvest festivals celebrating the bounty of the grain and the fruit orchard. The goal was simple: be the first to finish a large, often cold meat or fruit pie, without the use of hands. It was a messy, breathless spectacle of gluttony, where participants' faces were soon smeared with crust and filling, to the roaring delight of the crowd. It was less about savoring flavor and more about sheer, comedic endurance, a public celebration of abundance through its most ridiculous overindulgence. Alongside the pies flowed the ale, and drinking competitions were their own revered sport. These were not casual affairs. A common challenge was to drain a large tankard, sometimes called a yard of ale due to the length of the glass, in one continuous gulp without spilling a drop. The skill lay in controlling one's breath and the angle of the vessel, a delicate balance while performing a feat of pure volume. Other contests were races to finish a set number of mugs the fastest, or last man standing endurance trials that stretched late into the festival night. The humor was broad and the camaraderie intense, with fellow competitors and spectators alike cheering each participant through their increasingly unsteady efforts. These culinary games served a deeper purpose than mere revelry. In a world where food security was a constant, fragile concern, a public contest of gluttony was a powerful, symbolic act. It demonstrated a temporary victory over scarcity. To willfully waste energy and consume to the point of discomfort was a luxurious declaration that, for this day at least, the harvest was good and the community was safe. The laughter that echoed around the pie-eating table was the sound of collective relief. Furthermore, these contests reinforced social bonds through shared, visceral experience. Passing a massive tankard among a group, or cheering on a friend as he struggled through a last bite of pie, created memories cemented in sheer physical sensation. The man who won the drinking race might be useless for work the next day, but his victory, celebrated by all, became a local legend, a story told and embellished for years to come. In this way, the simplest game of all, the contest of consumption, tied the physical act of feasting directly to the heart of the festival, transforming a basic human need into a public, playful, and profoundly social performance of joy and security. The laughter at the ale-stained table was never truly free from the watchful eye of the castle on the hill. For every spontaneous burst of village joy, there was a lord, a bishop, or a king who understood the immense power contained within a festival's revelry. The games were not merely entertainment. They were a subtle, potent tool of governance. A wise ruler knew that sponsoring a grand tournament or a public feast was an investment in his own authority. By providing the spectacle, he positioned himself as the source of communal joy and bounty. The staggering cost of a multi-day tournament, from the prizes of fine armor and war horses to the feasts for hundreds of nights, was a public display of wealth so vast it became a form of political theater. When a king like Henry VIII of England hosted the Field of the Cloth of Gold, an immense festival of jousting and pageantry meant to dazzle his French rival. The message was clear: his power and magnificence were unmatched. For the common people, a royal-sponsored festival with free bread, ale, and games created a powerful bond of loyalty. It translated abstract concepts of lordship and duty into the tangible, joyful experience of a full belly and thrilling entertainment. This calculated generosity was a masterstroke of public relations, turning potential unrest into grateful celebration, and cementing the ruler's image as a benevolent provider. This control extended far beyond mere sponsorship. The social order of the medieval world, so rigid in daily life, was meticulously enforced, even within the festival's playful chaos. This was achieved through sumptuary laws and strict codes of participation. Sumptuary laws dictated what people could wear, down to the color of their cloth and the type of fur on their trim, based on their social rank. These rules did not disappear for the games. At a tournament, the quality of a knight's banner, the embroidery on his horse's trappings, and even the colors he wore proclaimed his status to all. A merchant might be wealthy, but he could not legally dress his retinue in the silks and velvets reserved for nobility, ensuring visual hierarchy was maintained in the crowd. More directly, the games themselves were often segregated. The joust was exclusively the domain of the knightly class, a closed circuit of aristocratic competition. A wealthy farmer, no matter how strong or skilled, could not simply enter the lists. The barrier was one of birth, not ability. Similarly, while villagers might stage their own mock battles, the grand melee with its valuable ransoms was for those who already owned expensive armor and horses. Even spectating had its rules. The best views of the joust, from raised wooden stands or the castle walls, were reserved for the nobility and their invited guests. The common folk watched from the outer edges, their physical placement a constant reminder of their station. This careful choreography ensured that the festival, while a temporary release, never truly overturned the established order. It allowed for a controlled venting of energy and a display of common skill, but always within boundaries that reinforced the ultimate authority of the ruling class. The games were a safety valve, but one installed and operated by the lords in the castle. That carefully choreographed safety valve could, and often did, rupture violently. For all the rules and ranks, the medieval festival lived on a knife's edge between celebration and catastrophe, where the very games meant to channel aggression could ignite it instead. The line between a spirited contest and a full-scale riot was terrifyingly thin, often crossed in the heat of a disputed finish or the fog of too much ale. Historical records are littered with these explosions. At a football match in Norwich in the 1400s, what began as the annual game between the parishes of St. Peter Mancroft and St. John de Sepulchre spiraled into a city-wide brawl. The dispute started over a goal, or perhaps a foul that no one could agree upon, and soon spilled from the field into the streets. Shop stalls were overturned, windows shattered, and by the end, several participants were seriously injured, leading to arrests and lasting bitterness between the neighborhoods. In Scotland, the famous bar game in Kirkwall sometimes saw the mass scrum intentionally diverted to smash through the door of a disliked merchant or official, turning sport into targeted vandalism. But it wasn't just the common folk. The tournament, the pinnacle of aristocratic control, was equally volatile. At a tournament in Rochester in 1251, a simple quarrel over a winning lance strike between two groups of knights escalated into a bloody street fight that left many dead and forced the king to intervene. The festival's atmosphere of suspended norms and heightened passions was a tinderbox, and the games provided the spark. Faced with this constant threat of disorder, authorities tried desperately to regulate the unruliness. Royal proclamations and town council edicts repeatedly tried to ban the most disruptive games, especially football, within city walls. A decree from King Edward III in 1363 forbade football, citing the game's noise and chaos as a distraction from the far more important practice of archery. London officials issued similar bans, lamenting the broken windows and the general great uproar the games caused. The bans, however, were spectacularly unsuccessful, repeated so often they became a ritual in themselves. The people simply moved their games to the fields outside the town gates, or played them in the streets when the constables weren't looking. The desire to play, to engage in that ancient, cathartic release, was stronger than the law. Regulation of animal sports was slightly more effective, but only in specific contexts. Town councils, worried about the danger of an enraged bull breaking loose in a crowded market square, sometimes banned bull baiting from the main streets, confining it to designated pits on the outskirts. The goal was not to end the cruelty, but to manage the risk to human life and property. This endless tug of war between popular will and official control reveals the festival's true dual nature. It was a sanctioned space for chaos, but only a certain amount, and only of a certain kind. The moment the playful violence of the game bled into genuine social rebellion, the full force of authority would come down. The games could mock the social order, but they could never truly overthrow it, for the same lords who cheered the joust also manned the walls. The walls that once contained the festival's chaos are long gone, but their echo is everywhere you look. Every summer, in fields and forests across the world, the colorful tents of modern Renaissance fairs and medieval festivals rise again, promising a doorway to the past. Yet the games played within them are a fascinating negotiation, a careful blend of historical truth, modern safety, and pure theatrical invention. This is where our historical mystery collides with living memory, revealing what we choose to remember, what we must change, and what we happily invent. The most direct lineage can be seen in the demonstrations of skill. Archery ranges are a staple, where visitors can feel the heft of a longbow and learn the demanding posture of a draw. The targets, however, are standard bullseyes at safe, manageable distances, a far cry from the clout shooting at 200 yards or the roving marks across the countryside. It is a taste of the skill, stripped of its martial lethality and scaled for tourist enjoyment. Similarly, the joust is almost always present, but it exists now purely as a demonstration. The thundering charge, the splintering lance, the dramatic fall, these are choreographed performances by trained stunt riders. The lances are designed to break spectacularly on impact. The armor is meticulously crafted for safety, and the outcome is a scripted story of good versus evil, complete with a dastardly villain and a heroic champion. The deadly joust of war and the chaotic melee have vanished, replaced by a thrilling, predictable, and utterly safe spectacle. This is not a failure, but an adaptation. Modern liability and a fundamental respect for human life demand it. We have traded historical accuracy for the ability to witness the visual and auditory grandeur of the tournament without its gruesome cost. The raw communal tests of strength have also been transformed. You will seldom see a stone put or a sheaf toss with actual farm weights. Instead, you might find a strongman challenge where participants try to ring a bell by hitting a target with a mallet, a carnival game descendant of the high striker. Or you may see staged wrestling matches between performers in period garb, showcasing impressive throws and locks, but as part of a scripted show rather than a spontaneous contest for local pride. The visceral, practical connection to agricultural labor has been severed, repackaged as entertainment divorced from its original context. Some of the most popular activities are pure modern creations, born from our romanticized vision of the era. The drench a wench or soak a bloke water balloon toss, using catapults to target a person in the stocks, is a goofy, family-friendly invention with no real historical precedent. Fantasy elements bleed in freely, with axe-throwing ranges using lightweight, sport axes and dragon rides for children, blending the medieval with the mythical in a way the original festivals, rooted in the tangible realities of their world, would not recognize. This creative license is the heart of the modern festival's appeal. It is not trying to be a historical reenactment. It is building a themed playground inspired by a romanticized past. The games are designed first for participant enjoyment and safety, then for aesthetic flavor. We sanitize the violence, invent new amusements, and filter everything through a lens of nostalgia and fantasy. Yet, in doing so, these modern gatherings fulfill a similar core function as their ancestors. They are a break from the ordinary, a space for communal gathering and shared wonder. The child trying archery for the first time feels a spark of the same focused challenge a yeoman's son might have felt. The crowd gasping in unison at a jouster's fall participates in a collective emotional experience, not so different from the medieval spectators. We have traded the authentic danger for accessible wonder, but the human desire to play, to watch, and to be transported together remains beautifully, stubbornly unchanged. So let's bring one of those ancient skills off the page and into your own backyard. We can recreate a version of the clout shoot, the long-distance archery contest that tested a bowman's mastery of the sky. This modern adaptation is about capturing the spirit of the challenge, not the lethal force, focusing on skill and the beautiful arc of a long shot. First, safety is paramount. You will need a clear, controlled space. A large open field where you have exclusive permission to shoot is essential, with a natural backstop like a steep hill or dense woods behind your target area. Never shoot toward roads, trails, or areas where people could wander. For equipment, a simple low-poundage recurve bow is perfect. These are widely available, easier to draw than a historical longbow, and ideal for beginners. Use target arrows with blunt, field points, not sharp broadheads. The heart of the clout shoot is the target itself. Forget a colored bullseye. Historically, it was a flag on the ground. Your modern version can be a large, flat circle, about 6 feet across, marked on the grass. You can use a hula hoop as a stencil with sprayed chalk, lay down a circular tarp, or even rope off the area. Place a bright marker like a small cone or a weighted flag in the very center. This is your clout. Now for distance. A true medieval clout could be over 200 yards, a staggering shot. For a safe and achievable backyard version, start much closer. A distance of 40 to 60 yards is an excellent challenge that still requires a high, arcing shot. The goal is the same as it was 600 years ago, to land your arrows as close as possible to that central marker. You do not shoot directly at the target on a flat line. You must aim high, sending your arrow on a towering parabolic flight, so it plunges down into the circle. This tests your ability to judge elevation, account for the wind, and control the power of your release. To score, walk to the target after all arrows are shot. The arrow closest to the central marker scores the most points. You can create a simple scoring ring, awarding 5 points for an arrow inside the hoop, 3 points for an arrow within a 3-foot radius, and 1 point for any arrow in the general target area. The archer with the highest total after a set number of rounds, say 3 rounds of 3 arrows each, wins. The skills this game honors are timeless: patience, focus, and a feel for the invisible forces of physics. It connects you in a small but tangible way to the yeoman who stood on a windy English field, squinting at a distant scrap of cloth, calculating the flight of a shaft that could decide a battle or win a silver arrow. Setting up this simple contest transforms a piece of open ground into a historical arena, where the only sound is the twang of the string and the quiet thud of an arrow finding its mark in the grass. That quiet thud of an arrow in grass speaks of distance and focus, but the festival also rang with the sharp, metallic clank of a perfect throw. For a game that required no special field and welcomed players of any age, few contests matched the elegant simplicity of quoits. This was not the horseshoe toss of the American frontier, but its older, more refined ancestor, a game of geometry and gentle touch that turned any patch of level ground into an arena. Historically, the equipment was beautifully straightforward. Players used heavy rings, forged from iron or cast from lead, their edges worn smooth by generations of hands. In poorer communities, they might use rings of rope, stiffened with tar, or even slices cut from a sturdy branch. The target was an iron pin, called a hob, driven directly into the earth. The court could be drawn in the dirt of a tavern yard, or on the packed earth of a festival green, requiring nothing more than 2 hobs spaced roughly 18 yards apart. The objective was pure physics, to land your quoit, a ring roughly 6 inches across, over the distant pin. A ringer where the quoit settled cleanly around the hob scored the highest points. A leaner where the quoit touched the pin but did not encircle it scored less. The beauty of the game lay in its deceptive difficulty. A quoit is not a discus. It is not meant for a powerful, flat throw. The technique is an underhand lob, a smooth, pendulum-like motion from the shoulder. The player must impart just enough forward momentum and, crucially, the correct axis of rotation so the ring flies flat through the air, descends almost vertically, and bites into the ground around the pin. Too much force and it skids hopelessly past, too little and it falls short. A wobbling flight dooms the attempt. It is a game of finesse, not strength, where a child's delicate touch could outscore a blacksmith's powerful arm. Bringing this game to your own backyard is wonderfully simple and deeply satisfying. For modern family-safe quoits, you can purchase sets of rubber or plastic rings, which are lightweight and perfect for children. For a more authentic feel and weight, you can use rope rings or even search for replica metal sets designed for lawn games. To set up your court, find a flat area of grass or packed sand. Measure out your pitching distance. For adults, a classic distance is about 21 feet, but feel free to shorten it for younger players or to make the game more casual. At each end, you will need a target area. Instead of driving an iron pin into your lawn, a great substitute is a short wooden stake, a section of PVC pipe pushed into the ground, or even a hula hoop laid flat as a scoring zone. The goal remains the same, to lob your ring so it lands encircling the stake, or within the designated scoring circle. Scoring can follow the traditional method, 2 points for a ringer, 1 point for a leaner, or any variation you choose. The first player or team to reach 21 points wins, but you must hit the exact number. Going over means you drop back down. This rule adds a thrilling layer of strategy, forcing players to decide whether to play for a safe, single-point shot or risk a bold ringer for 2. As you stand in your yard, feeling the weight of the ring in your hand and judging the arc to the distant pin, you are participating in a chain of play that stretches back centuries. You are sharing the same quiet concentration, the same moment of calculation, and the same shout of triumph that echoed across 1,000 medieval village greens. It is a direct, tangible link to the past, proving that the simplest games, built on skill and friendly competition, are often the ones that endure the longest. Standing on that quiet lawn, you can almost hear the ghost of another sound, a deep metallic clang from a ring striking true. But that single note was just one thread in an immense tapestry of noise that defined the real medieval festival. To step onto that field was to be enveloped by a wall of sound, a physical, thrilling cacophony that was as much a part of the games as the rules themselves. Close your eyes and listen. First, the rhythmic, percussive heart of combat, the sharp crack of wooden practice, swords meeting shields, a staccato beat of training and friendly bouts. Beneath it, the heavy, wet thud of a river stone hitting soft earth after a mighty put, followed by the collective groan or cheer of the spectators. From the archery range, a different music, the tense silence of the draw, then the sudden, vibrating twang of a dozen bowstrings released at once, followed by the distant, whispering patter of arrows peppering a straw butt. This was not a quiet, polite sporting event. It was a roaring, living entity. The crowd itself was a constant animal roar, a blend of shouted wagers, gasped surprises, and raucous laughter. Vendors bellowed over the din, hawking meat pies and ale. In one corner, the frantic barking and snarling of dogs echoed from the baiting pit, mixing with the deeper bellow of a tethered bull. Near the tents, the wheeze of bagpipes and the rhythmic drumming for a circle dance added a melodic thread to the chaos. This sensory overload was not an accident. It was the point. The soundscape was a direct measure of excitement and danger. The sharper the crack of a lance, the more intense the clash, the louder the crowd's eruption, the more significant the victory or the upset. The sounds told you where to look, they signaled drama, and they raised everyone's pulse. You felt the games in your chest as much as you saw them with your eyes. The festival was a total immersion, a temporary world built not just of sights, but of a glorious, unforgettable racket that announced, to every sense, that the ordinary rules of life were suspended. That glorious, unforgettable racket was not just a backdrop for men's games. Behind the roar of the crowd and the clash of arms lies one of the great quiet mysteries of the medieval festival. Where were the women? The traditional image places them as passive spectators, watching from the sidelines or bestowing favors upon knights. But history, when you listen closely, whispers a more complex and active story. Women were not merely an audience, they were participants, carving out their own spaces for play within the strict boundaries of their world. Their participation was a subtle dance of social rules, often hidden in plain sight within the very games deemed appropriate for their station. Archery, for instance, was not an exclusively male domain. While the war bow was a man's weapon, the lighter hunting bow or the crossbow was frequently used by noblewomen for sport. Manuscript illustrations and household accounts show ladies practicing in private gardens or castle grounds. For a noblewoman, skill with a bow was a mark of refined leisure, a graceful activity that still required focus and steady hand. At the festive level, women of all classes were absolutely central to the dance, that most social of games. The circle carol and the intricate weaving of the maypole ribbons relied on their participation. It was a cooperative game where their grace and memory were essential to the community's success. In the quieter corners of the celebration, women engaged in games of cunning and strategy. They were avid players of board games like Nine Men's Morris and Fox and Geese, contests of intellect played in solar rooms or on the steps of festival tents. These were not trivial pastimes. They were respected exercises in tactical thinking, a mental arena where a woman could demonstrate a sharp mind. Evidence even hints at more physically vigorous play in certain times and places. During the rowdy celebrations of Shrove Tuesday, records from England and France note foot races for young, unmarried women. These were often symbolic events, with a prize of a cake or a ribbon, but they were races nonetheless, a sanctioned moment for female speed and competition to be publicly celebrated. The picture shifts dramatically with social class. A peasant woman's games were often inseparable from her work, the stamina needed for harvest festivals, the dexterity for tasks turned into friendly competition. A noblewoman's leisure was more structured and symbolic, tied to displays of courtly grace. Yet across all ranks, the festival offered a rare, sanctioned expansion of agency. For a day, a woman could be more than a daughter, wife, or mother. She could be a dancer integral to a ritual, a competitor in a race, or a strategist across a checkered board. Their play was a quiet assertion of personhood, a thread of joy and skill woven into the festival's loud tapestry, proving that even in a world built for men, the games, in their many forms, found a way to include half of humanity. The roar of the festival was a direct challenge to the quiet reverence of the church. From the pulpit, the view of these games was often one of profound suspicion and outright condemnation. To many clergy, the violent pastimes and raucous gambling were not harmless fun. They were a dangerous slide into sin that corrupted both the soul and the social order. Church decrees and sermons from across medieval Europe thunder against them. They condemned the tournaments as bloody vanity, a waste of Christian life for mere earthly glory. They railed against football and other mob games for the riots, injuries, and profanity they inevitably produced, especially when played on Sundays or holy days meant for prayer and reflection. Most of all, they denounced the dice games and heavy wagering as the work of the devil, a direct temptation that led men into greed, debt, and violence against their neighbors. This was not a minor disagreement over leisure. It was a spiritual battle for how a Christian community should spend its time and channel its passions. The festival's temporary suspension of order looked, from the church's perspective, like a surrender to chaos and base instinct. Yet this relationship was far more complicated than simple opposition. The church itself was deeply embedded in the community's festive life, leading to a fascinating and often pragmatic accommodation. Many of the very festivals it presided over had roots in ancient pagan celebrations, marking the solstices and harvests. Rather than erase them, the church frequently Christianized these traditions, overlaying them with new meaning. The wild spring fertility rites became the more subdued celebrations of Easter and May Day, with the maypole's pagan symbolism softened into a general celebration of community. The church could not eliminate the human desire for seasonal celebration, so it sought to redirect it. This pragmatism reached its peak with a unique institution, the church ale. This was a fundraising festival, often held in the churchyard or a nearby barn, organized by the parish to raise money for repairs, the poor, or church supplies. The clergy themselves sanctioned these events. And what was the main attraction that drew the crowds and opened their purses? Games, drink, and revelry. There would be food, abundant ale brewed specially for the occasion, and the very same games of skill and chance condemned elsewhere, like archery contests, 9 men's morris, and even dancing. The church needed the community's money, and the community wanted to play. The church ale became a sanctioned loophole, a holy excuse for a party. It was a perfect illustration of the medieval church's dual role, as both a stern moral guardian and a practical, grounded institution that understood the social fabric it was part of. It condemned the sin, but it could also brew the ale that paid for the new roof. This tension reveals a fundamental truth: the medieval festival, for all its chaos, existed in a negotiated space. It was a constant, lively argument between sacred and secular, between the desire for order and the need for release, played out not in theological texts, but in the muddy, joyful, and conflicted reality of the village green. The church's quiet accommodation reminds us how much of the festival was never recorded at all. For every grand tournament chronicled in lavish detail, there were 1,000 local games that lived and died by word of mouth, their rules etched only in memory and tradition. These were the true heart of medieval play, the spontaneous contests invented in a moment between friends or passed down through generations in a single village, and they are almost entirely lost to us. We catch fleeting glimpses in the margins of manuscripts, a quick sketch of children playing a ball game we cannot name, or in a passing line from a poet mentioning a village competition for the best apple bobber or the fastest sack racer. These were the games of pure local joy, unburdened by national law or noble spectacle. Imagine the unique contest that might have sprung up in a coastal village, where competitors raced while balancing on floating logs in the shallows. Or the game from a forest settlement that involved hurling specially carved wooden cones at a target in the trees. Every community, shaped by its landscape and daily work, likely had its own signature pastime, a game that made perfect, hilarious sense only to them. This brings us back to that most beautiful mystery, the game of the rose. We can speculate endlessly. Perhaps it was a blindfolded game of touch and guess, where courtiers in a garden had to identify their beloved by the scent of a rose they held. Maybe it was a poetic duel, where suitors took turns composing verses, and the lady awarded the rose to the most eloquent, turning a literary contest into a public declaration of favor. Or it could have been a physical challenge of astonishing delicacy, where players used tiny silver hooks to try and pull a rose through a labyrinth of silk threads without tearing a single petal. The truth is, we will likely never know, and that is the final, poignant lesson of this exploration. The historical record is not a complete picture. It is a collection of fragments, biased toward the powerful, the violent, and the expensive. The full, vibrant, noisy reality of medieval play is a puzzle with most of its pieces missing. We have the grand edges, the joust and the archery but the rich, colorful center, filled with the laughter of 1,000 forgotten games, is a beautiful, silent blank. Our understanding is, and will always be, a reconstruction, an educated guess at the shape of the joy that once filled those fields. The mystery itself is the most compelling game of all. That silent blank in the historical record is precisely what makes the surviving fragments so precious. From the thunderous, bone-breaking chaos of the melee to the silent, intense focus of a 9-men's Morris board, from the soaring arc of a clout arrow to the simple, satisfying clank of a quoit's ringer, the medieval festival was a universe of play. It celebrated raw strength and delicate precision, communal riot and solitary strategy, the sacred and the profane, all woven together on the same crowded field. These games were never just pastimes. They were a vibrant, living mirror held up to the society that created them. They reflected the martial needs of a violent age, the agricultural rhythms that dictated survival, the rigid social hierarchies that ordered life, and the universal human hunger for joy, competition, and connection. They were where a knight proved his worth, a farmer won respect, a community vented its tensions, and a child learned the rules of the world. The games were the spirit of the age, made physical. So what remains of that spirit for us today? The invitation is still open. You can seek it out at a historical reenactment or Renaissance fair, where the smell of turned earth and the sound of a blacksmith's hammer might transport you for an afternoon. Better yet, you can bring a piece of it to life yourself. Find a flat patch of grass, mark 2 targets, and challenge a friend to a game of lawn quoits. Feel the weight of the ring, judge the arc, and for a moment you are not just playing a game, you are touching a tradition centuries old. Tell us in the comments which medieval contest calls to you. Is it the graceful challenge of the clout shoot, the mental duel of fox and geese, or the sheer, joyful mayhem of a village football match? Your choice is a small window into that lost world, and a testament to the timeless power of play.